All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third annual New York City DOE Youth Climate Summit. I'm back for week 3. I was on for week 1 and Eliza took over week 2, but I'm back. So I'm Pat Keys. I'm the Special Projects Coordinator for the Office of Sustainability. And if you missed the first couple weeks, to fill you in on who we are, the Office of Sustainability helps schools with different sustainability initiatives, both through an operations perspective, so helping schools with things like waste management, recycling, composting, energy management, but also through environmental education. So we provide resources and trainings for educators and students, like today's event. We also work with a youth leadership council. So it's about 30 high school students who meet regularly to tackle different sustainability initiatives at their schools, to mentor younger students, develop resources, and help us in planning of events like today's. So they've been really instrumental, and you'll be hearing from several of them throughout the event today and next week. So just a couple logistics before we dive too deeply in. This session is being recorded, and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube account and sending that link to you tomorrow. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. So want to distinguish between the Q&A and the chat. The Q&A you can use to ask questions of our keynote today, Lauren. But if you just have a general thought, I'm going to ask a couple questions in a minute. We want you to use the chat for that. So when you're using the chat, you want to just make sure that you're hitting all panelists and attendees. So if we could test out the chat right now, if this is your first week at the summit, if you could just give a little shout out, say your name, maybe your school. And if this is not your first week, if you're returning, can you let us know something that stood out to you at a previous week or your favorite moment so far of the summit? So as some of those thoughts are coming in, we've brought up a couple of questions each week that I'd love to come back to right now. So as we're attending the summit, I invite everybody to think about a couple questions as they relate to you and your community. I want you to think about, what's your climate story? How can you connect your interest to climate action? What have you learned throughout the summit that you could apply to your school or community? And how can you use your voice to bring awareness to important issues? So one thing you can do, one way you can get involved, first of all, is to check out our resource portal. So each week we have been updating our portal summit page with different resources. So the different keynote presentations, different resources that have become available. We have workshop resources. So definitely check that out. We also invite you, if you're more artistic and you express yourself through art, we are accepting climate posters. The link should be popping up in the chat right now. If you are interested in that, please submit a climate poster by this Friday. And next week, what we're going to do is have a little rotating slide to show off everybody's artwork. And then we invite you to get involved in the conversation via social media. So if you're on Instagram, check us out. We're at NYC Youth Sustain. That's our Youth Leadership Council. And then our office is at NYC School Sustainability. And if you're not on Instagram, if you're on Twitter or TikTok, we definitely just encourage you to use our hashtag. It's NYCYCS21. Oops. And join us next week. So next Tuesday, the 23rd, is our final day of the summit. We're going to wrap things up with a career panel. So different people who work in sustainability talking about their careers. So definitely join us for that. And then we're going to be wrapping it up with just a final send-off. I want to take a moment to thank everybody who's helped out with this event. Thank you for attending, all of our partners who helped us out with workshops and other resources. And definitely want to mention a few members of our Youth Leadership Council who helped us out a lot with the planning of this event. So Carol Hahn, she launched the artwork that I was just mentioning. That was her idea. Ivy Morin helped us out with the icebreakers each week. Camilla Pilch handles the social media for the Youth Leadership Council's account. And Anna Cathwalla has been helping us compile resources each week. And want to turn things over to Anna now. She's going to be introducing our keynote. Anna's a sophomore at Stuyvesant High School. This is her second year in our Youth Leadership Council, and we're so happy to have her with us today. Anna, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. Hi, everyone. So as Pat said, my name is Anna Cathwalla. I'm a sophomore at Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan. I'm really excited to be here with all of you, and it's been so great to see your work and your progress over the past couple of weeks. I am going to give a quick intro to Lauren, who's our keynote speaker for the week, and then I'll turn it over to her. So Lauren is a 19-year-old climate activist, writer, podcast host, and third-year university student interning for the Earth Institute. She is the creator of the Eco-Justice Project, a digital platform that educates on global climate justice, promotes intersectional climate action, and seeks to make sustainable living more accessible and inclusive by amplifying the voices of marginalized communities. She's also a writer and content strategist for Brown Girl Green, a youth ambassador for Plastic Pollution Coalition, and the Global Wildlife Conversation. She is also the co-host of the podcast Black Girl Blueprint, a platform to center the voices and celebrate the accomplishments of young Black women in a vast array of fields. So Lauren, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much for, give me 1 second there we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you all see my screen? All good. Zoom text still gets a little difficult sometimes. But hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Anna, for that introduction. I'm really excited to be talking to you all today. I really wanted to go through a lot of those reflection questions that Pat was talking about, tell you a little bit more about my climate story, what it was like transitioning from having a passion about sustainability to making that into potentially a career or what I'm studying in college, a little bit more about what virtual activism and advocacy looks like, especially in the age of Zoom, and then just talking about really the importance of equity and inclusion in climate action, because I know you've been talking a lot about environmental justice in the summit. So I'm going to get right into it. First thing I want to talk about is a little bit more about me. So as Anna mentioned, I'm originally from the Caribbean. I was born and raised in the Bahamas, and I think that has a lot to do, honestly, with why I'm so passionate about climate change and where my climate story began. So growing up in the Bahamas, I was always surrounded by beaches. As you can see in that third photo on the right, that's my backyard. So that's very much, I was always involved in the environment. I saw it every time I looked outside my window. I was very passionate about protecting my island and my ecosystems. It's also what I would learn about in my high school classes, whether that was coral reefs or mangrove ecosystems. I always really had a great appreciation for the environment. And then in high school, that turned into me doing a lot of beach cleanups, as you can see in the second photo, and spending a lot of time outdoors and just really delving into this passion for climate. Also, I think I was very grateful that being from the Bahamas gave me a very unique perspective in terms of the climate crisis, just because, as a lot of you are probably aware, Caribbean nations are at an extremely high risk of climate change, whether that's from hurricanes and natural disasters or rising sea levels, oil drilling, all of those things. So I was very passionate about protecting my home and protecting my community. And that's where I knew that sustainability is what I wanted to devote my life to and what I wanted to study. So from there, lived in the Bahamas, graduated high school there. Then came this transition of trying to figure out what that looks like as a college career. So as Anna mentioned, I'm in my third year studying sustainable development at Columbia right now. It was a very daunting transition, honestly, trying to move from my small island to the big city. And I think finding, the right school for me really came down to finding the right major for me. So a big part of that and that transition was doing as much research as possible into what sustainable development was. And actually the whole reason why I ended up choosing Columbia was specifically for that major and the types of classes that Columbia offered about that. And I think for any of you who are really, passionate about sustainability, are really enjoying these workshops and, this summit, I think that's something to think about in terms of what types of majors might be available to you if you are thinking about studying sustainability in college. So the first one is kind of what I'm studying, which is sustainable development. It's kind of a new major. Honestly, Columbia didn't even have it until 2010, but it's the coolest major. And I very much am a firm believer that it's the best major that you can study. But it was really cool for me to study this just because it kind of combined everything that I was interested. So like I said, I was really passionate about climate change, but I also really wanted to talk about social justice issues and sociology, how that plays into politics and the economy. So sustainable development, kind of the way I try to frame it is taking like the global issues that you see in the world and trying to think of solutions for those problems, which is kind of corny, a little bit cliche, but that's what this major means to me and how I like to study it. And environmental studies is the same way. Also, the sub headings that I have are what the major would be called, or the degree would be called, sorry. So sustainable development and environmental studies, those would be bachelor's of arts degrees. And environmental studies, like I said, is kind of the same thing as sustainable development. So if you do like SUSDev or sustainable development, sorry, not the cool, what the cool kids call it, SUSDev. But if you are interested in sustainable development and your school doesn't have it, environmental studies is very similar. But environmental science is something not very different, but environmental science would be a bachelor's of science, and that'd be more if you're interested in maybe research or biology, chemistry, physics, geology, math, things that I'm not very good at, but those types of things are very, very cool if that's the side of climate change that you want to be interested in. So keeping those majors in mind, but also my favorite thing about college wasn't always the academics. Going to be very, very real with you. I think my favorite parts and when I felt the most close to my sustainability journey or, you know, my sustainability community at Columbia was when I was getting involved in things on campus. So I put cute little pictures in there as well. But Columbia Eco Reps is a club that I was a part of. This is a picture from an event we did at commencement, but 9 times out of 10, there's going to be some type of sustainability club at your school. And if there isn't, there's also always opportunities to start one if that's something that you're very interested in. So grouping together a community of people that are interested in sustainability in the way that you are can be a great way to meet more people, engage in these conversations, X, Y, and Z. And then on top of clubs, there's also probably a lot of research and internship opportunities that you can get into. And those are also great ways to get involved with faculty who's, you know, teaching your courses and engaging with them in that way. And also, you know, getting to know your peers. The picture that I put in here is from the internship that I'm doing with the Earth Institute at Columbia. Super cool, favorite internship I've ever done. But it's a great opportunity for me to take my passion, you know, for sustainability and for the planet and kind of channel it into a way to like make change on campus. So the Columbia Climate Conversations, you know, event or panel series that I started is just a way to have those conversations that I never saw in my classes and kind of implement it to try to make change on campus, which is a cool way, and then a way that I feel like I'm getting involved. So keeping that in mind for when you start on your college journey. And I also thought it'd be really great to like put something in here for anyone who might be a senior or junior or sophomore. Honestly, my first point that I'm going to make kind of shows why it's so important to talk about these things ahead of time. But this is kind of honestly some of the stuff that I wish that I knew when I was applying to college, because it was really tough for me. So I want you guys to avoid the issues that I ran into. But the biggest one is to start planning early. I did not start thinking about college seriously until the beginning of my senior year. I was also super busy, and I just was not delving into it in like the way that I should have been. So the earlier you start, the more you're giving yourself time to explore your options, find the right choice for you, and just reduce that stress of trying to do this so, you know, late in the school year. And also asking around. I know it can seem kind of daunting a little bit sometimes, but for the most part, a lot of current students and alumni will be willing to talk to you and engage with you. If you just send them a message on LinkedIn, a DM on Instagram, obviously please do not spam their messages. But for the most part, if you just reach out to people, they'll be able to give you some information about what the experience is like on campus. And then also leaning into a lot of virtual resources, especially now since we are online, whether that's virtual tours or info sessions, programs that your school might be having with like talks and things like that. There's a lot of valuable information out there. So just lean into that and try to find the best fit for you. And the last one is the most important one that I really want to hammer home is there is kind of this trap that you can fall into of kind of wanting to do as many extracurriculars as possible and pack your resume and pack your college application with a bunch of miscellaneous different activities. And I am a firm believer, and everyone that I've talked to has agreed with this, that it's a lot more about quality and consistency over the quantity of the achievements that you have. So it's really worthwhile to try to figure out what your passion is and then kind of invest in the extracurriculars that kind of show your continued interest in that thing. And also things that you actually enjoy. You don't want to just be doing a bunch of random activities that you're not finding any joy in. So that way, when you do, create your college application, your extracurriculars can match up with your essay, and it kind of shows a picture of who you are and what you're passionate about. And that's a lot more worthwhile. And I think that's what colleges want to see. So moving on from college, kind of transitioning into this conversation about virtual activism and ways that you can be a good climate advocate when we are on social media a lot of the time, or Zoom. And I think there is kind of this stereotype of a one-size-fits-all approach to activism, which is that you need to be going to protests all the time and signing petitions and whatever we stereotypically think of when we think of activism. And I think especially when you're younger, when you're in high school, when you're just in college, it can be difficult to try to get involved in those things or feel like those things are accessible to you. But also now with the pandemic, it's even more difficult to try to get involved in those kind of more hands-on or grassroots approaches to activism. But what I think is really important to do is break down that stereotype that that's the only way to be a good advocate. I think quarantine was a real turning point for me and for a lot of people, actually, like in the wake of George Floyd, especially, thinking about what it was like, to see that mass mobilization on social media, or all those campaigns or those infographics and all of that social media education and awareness in a way that we hadn't seen before really does show that times are changing, and that, education and awareness and advocacy and mobilization can really look like whatever you want it to look like. And I'm grateful for quarantine in some ways that broke down that stereotype for me and allowed me to take that risk and jump into a project that was really exciting for me. And that led to my two passion projects, which were the Eco Justice Project and my podcast, Black Girl Blueprint, both of which I thoroughly enjoy right now. And really just started because I wanted to talk about these things and they felt important to me, and I wanted to do my part. And it would have been valuable to me even if nobody ever listened to a single episode or if no one ever looked at my posts. There are definitely ways that you can get involved, especially if you are passionate about it. That's worthwhile. And I think just making sure you remember that there's no action that's too small or too insignificant, even though it might feel like it. There's so much that you can do online and on social media to get involved and to do your part. So keeping that in mind is very, very important. And kind of the last thing that I wanted to talk about is something that's very passionate and important to me with the Eco Justice Project, and that's about inclusivity in climate action. And I know there have been a lot of conversations that you guys have been having about environmental justice, environmental racism, the ways that social justice and climate justice kind of work together in terms of intersectionality, inclusivity, representation. And I just want to hammer home how important that is, especially for people of color who might be entering into the sustainability field, which is a predominantly white field. And I know especially for me, I was often the only Black woman in a lot of my classes. And when we were having these conversations about environment and climate change, very rarely did I see people who looked like me, but also very rarely did I hear about the experiences of my community. So I think hammering home that if you are going to invest in sustainability, if you are want this to be a passion for you, this is something that you're really passionate about, you want to keep working on, keeping in mind in every facet of climate action that you try to do, always trying to advocate for marginalized communities, always making sure that you're amplifying those voices and those stories, and making sure that those experiences are put at the forefront is so important for this type of work, because it's very important work in general. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. That's me. But yeah, thank you all. Again, like I said, very, very grateful to be here. And I hope that was helpful and that you guys learned a little something about me, gives you some advice. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got to say.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. It was a lot of food for thought. So folks, if you have questions, if you could please put them into the Q&A right now. And Anna's going to read a few questions out right now.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Lauren, for that amazing presentation. I learned a lot myself. So we have a couple questions for you. The first one is, would you be able to share the other schools that were on your radar in terms of your college application process?
Sure, yeah. So for me, coming from the Bahamas, I really was mostly, honestly, and also because I waited so long and I did not do enough research, but I was mostly looking at the schools that were very well-known names, just because they were the only ones that I really knew about. So definitely the other Ivies were on my radar, but also in terms of sustainable development, actually kind of a funny story. The way that I learned about the sustainable development major was from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. I know, kind of far away, but they have a really, really great sustainable development program. And I actually applied to all of my schools as biochem. I don't know why. But I'd applied to them as biochem, and they saw that continued interest and story that I was telling you about. And they were like, have you considered sustainable development? It seems like that's actually what you're interested in. And from there, yes. So the University of St. Andrews was really great. Other schools that I was thinking of, University of Pennsylvania was also on my radar. Cornell, Georgetown, McGill University in Canada, also very great. But yes, University of St. Andrews and that sustainable development program is a hidden gem.
That's awesome. Okay, great. So we have another question. So someone was asking, what did you do to get involved with sustainability in high school?
Yeah, so like I said, I very much was a big proponent for beach cleanups. Again, I know those are not always readily accessible if you don't live somewhere with a beach, but I think I would very much enjoyed community-based action for my involvement in high school. So it had a lot to do with whether that was beach cleanups on the weekends or radio type things to spread awareness. Sometimes we would do demonstrations on the side of the street, holding up our signs, being like, don't litter, and things like that. Yeah, and also just getting my friends involved in any way that I could was really, really helpful. Also, I started an eco club as well at my school. So things like that were great.
That's so impressive. It's very cool. So we have another question. Do you have any tips for communicating with people who do not think climate change affects them directly?
That's a big one, honestly. And I think the challenge with that has a lot to do with the narrative that we talk about when we talk about sustainability. So usually you'll hear, save the whales, save the planet, save the trees. And while that is definitely a part of sustainability, it doesn't really encompass the personal element or the community element, which is the ways that, saving the trees also means like clean air and oxygen for people, or, saving the oceans might also save, livelihoods for people who are, you see agriculture or fisheries as a source of their sustenance, XYZ, or food systems. So I think breaking it down and really hammering down those personal impacts, those community impacts, even in terms of human health is a big one, in terms of raising temperatures, also raises the increase in like heat waves and heat stroke, and also like heat diseases and things like that. So yeah, definitely hammering home those points about that community element, and also just pointing them towards resources, I think, is one of my favorite things to do. I'll have like some articles on deck and be like, here's the literature. If you don't want to believe me, believe these people who have, studied it, or here's this academic article that tells you all about this. But definitely engaging in those conversations with the kind of mindset that there's more to climate change than originally meets the eye.
Great, thank you. All right, I think we have time for one more question. So what is the most impactful thing you've learned since being in university? And was it from a class or from another engagement?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think the most impactful thing that I learned was, I think, hammering this idea of that there is no one size fits all to sustainability. I think I definitely came to Columbia with the type of idea, or even living in New York compared to what it means to live in the Bahamas, that sustainability is being vegan, sustainability is thrifting, sustainability is being zero waste, X, Y, and Z. And I think what was really revolutionary to me, and it honestly wasn't something I learned in a classroom, it was something that I learned from my peers and from people who were doing this type of social media advocacy, and from like my personal experience, was just that sustainability can be whatever is accessible to you and whatever you want it to look like, whatever it looks like in your community. I began to think a lot more about, people back home who are being sustainable and being zero waste, but not really thinking about it in that way. That was just our way of life. And that was just how we, did things to survive and things like that. So definitely the idea that, yeah, sustainability is just doing the best you can with whatever resources that you have is something that seems kind of cliche and it seems like a given, but there's a lot of pressure, I think, to be perfect when it comes to being sustainable or being environmentally cautious. And I don't believe in that at all. I just believe in trying your best, educating yourself as much as possible, and yeah, doing what you can with what's available to you. And that feels really important to me in my sustainability journey, especially as well.
Right. I think we actually have time for one more I want to squeeze in because we do have some time for people to transition. What would be your advice for other BIPOC who are interested in joining the climate movement? This question comes from Jalen.
Thank you, Jalen. That is a big one. My advice would be, first and foremost, to keep at it even when it's tough. I think definitely, like I was saying about being the only Black woman in a lot of my classes, it was hard a lot of the time. And I think being really candid and transparent for a minute, there would often be times when we'd be having a conversation and something about, the Black community would come up and everyone would turn to me to be an expert on that. Or, the teacher would turn to me to, explain and talk on behalf of my entire race. Or the inverse would be true, where there would be a situation where we were talking about something and there would be no conversations about BIPOC involved, and I would have to step up. Even though I'm trying to be in this classroom and I'm here to learn, I'd have to take on a teaching role in that moment and be like, hi, that's not exactly true, or hi, there's more to it in that, you're being kind of narrow in that. So I think acknowledging the fact that it will be tough sometimes. There's definitely being a lot more work done to be more inclusive and increase that representation, but unfortunately we're just not there yet. But I would encourage you to keep at it. I think this is so worthwhile. This work really means a lot, especially when you remember all the time who it is that you're doing it for. I think for me, that's something that helps me to keep it going. It's just that, yes, it's tough right now being like the only Black person in this climate movement, but also I'm doing this for my communities, my BIPOC communities that are being the most, readily impacted by climate change. So I think about my communities back home. I think about other Black people here in New York. I think about environmental racism happening in our backyard here in the Bronx with air quality and things like that. Flint, Michigan, with water quality, things like that. So I try to remember all the time who it is that I'm advocating for, what the cause is that I'm working towards, and just let that be a motivator to keep me going all the time. And also, final tip on that, lean into community as much as possible. My favorite part about the climate community, especially as a BIPOC and as the only person a lot of the time, is to be able to talk to other BIPOC about this experience or lean into that community, especially on social media. I have a great network of my BIPOC friends, and we'll just talk about the climate movement all the time. And it's a great feeling of solidarity to also remember that you're not alone, is really great. So that would be my advice on that one.
All right. Thank you so much, Lauren. A lot of great insight there. And thank you, Anna, for helping out with all the questions and for introducing. So I'm going to take it back over to go through a couple more logistic-y things. Just give me 1 minute here to share my screen. Okay. Alrighty, so if you are a high school student and you're here for the full summit, please head to your workshop. You would have gotten an email from your educator who's here with you today. If you can't find that email, you don't know where to go, or if the link's not working for some reason, please go to the tech room. We have a room for people who are having technical issues getting into their workshops. So that's on the screen and it'll be popped into the chat in a minute. And a reminder to make sure after the workshop to attend your climate action planning session. That's super important. So just want to, again, come back to these reflection questions before we moved on. A lot of it's related to what Lauren was just talking about. Thinking about what's your climate story, how you connect what you're interested in to climate action, whether it's through social media, creating a podcast like Lauren did. What did you learn that applies to your school or community? And how can you use your voice to bring attention to important issues? Couple other ways to continue to be involved. So again, I'm plugging our resource portal where we have a bunch of resources, the different keynote speakers, recordings. If, again, you are interested in the artwork side of things, you have until Friday. There's a mistake on the slide here. It's Friday, March 19th. So the link is on the screen and it'll also be popped in the chat. Again, we're going to be doing a small gallery walk next Summit Day, which is Tuesday the 23rd. Be sure to submit a climate action plan. So this is something you can do with your school community. There's a link on the screen and also in the chat. It's a way, again, to kind of take what you've learned and apply it to your community. And again, get involved in social media. We're on Instagram at Youth NYC Sustain and at NYC School Sustainability. And be sure to use the hashtag NYCYCS21. A couple other events to plug that are coming up. We have a Climate 101 training, this workshop, so it's on Thursday. It's for educators only, though not students. It's at 3:30 p.m. And there is CTLE credit, 1 credit available for that event. And we're also going to be having a Meet the Experts session on Thursday, March 25th. This is an ongoing series where we meet with different people in the sustainability field, and they talk about sustainability through the lens of their work. And then we open it up. It's about a half-hour talk, and then we open it for question and answer. And our Eventbrite link is on the screen, and it'll also be in the chat. Please join us next week. Okay, it's our final week of the summit. It's week 4. We're going to be having a career panel. So starting at 3:45, it's a great way to learn about different careers in sustainability. And some of these organizations, similar to what Lauren was talking about, have internships and job opportunities available for high school students. So definitely come to that. If you haven't registered for the summit yet, if somebody forwarded you today's link, please go ahead and register. The link is on the screen and it'll also be in the chat. And if folks have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A now. You can shoot me an email. We'll be hanging out for a couple minutes if anybody does have questions. And if not, thank you so much for coming. So again, if anybody has any questions, I'll be hanging out for a few more minutes. But otherwise, we hope to see you next week.